Ask the Podcast Coach for February 22nd, 2025.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it is Saturday morning. It is time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com. Today we're going to talk a little bit about WordPress. We got a power rant. And to help me go over those topics and anything else you want to talk about is the one and only Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Every time you say WordPress, I can't.
It's fun.
Yeah. It comes and goes, right? We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, well, it's funny. We talk about that with all software. It's great until it's not. And then everybody goes, what's the replacement? And then the, technicians fix the problem and you're back in, then it's like, oh, it's the best thing ever. So that's always fun. But I had a thing where I logged in and I just had this spinning thing just sat there.
Oh, yeah.
And, at 2 days, more or less, that I couldn't really do what I wanted to do. And to say I was just a little, what's the word? You just, it's like a little kid when you're putting your hand out, you're like, you can't move forward. And so just a little frustrated. And probably what I needed to do was kick back with a hot cup of Java or something. And just like Jim's doing now. And of course, sorry, I triggered it too quick. But
that's okay.
Yeah, that awesome cup of hot Java is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. And I always say, they see you before they hear you. And Mark just makes things pretty. It makes them look professional. It's your first impression, people. Don't blow it. And the beauty of Mark is, and it's not just artwork, it could be your whole website. We're going to talk about WordPress here in a second. But Mark takes WordPress and makes it dance. He makes it sing. He makes your website look amazing as well. And he makes it so that everything is in line with your brand, hence podcastbranding.co. And so he's going to listen to your show. He's going to find out what kind of vibe you're going for. And he's going to make your artwork align with your website and everything in between. And you're going to look amazing. And so when it comes to looking great, looking professional, there's only one place to go. And that is, of course, podcastbranding.co. And tell them, hey, Dave and Jim sent me. Tell him we said hi.
Do you think with all the strife between the United States and Canada right now that Mark's still talking to us? Do you think he
I don't know.
has he called you? Has he cut you off?
I have been trying to get a hold of him. There's I saw. Here's the fun thing is I didn't even realize what was going on. I kind of quit watching TV and I missed all the I guess fighting and hockey, and I was like, well, don't they always fight in hockey? So
Thursday night was a great game. Canadians won, but anyways, big thanks to our good friend Dan Lefebvre over there, based on a true story podcast.com. Talked about it last week. He's got a 3-part series going on, the Pinkertons. Check it out today if you're into that. If you want to know how much of that's based on a true story, 3 parts. That's a lot, Dan. That's a lot of podcasting. Appreciate your work out there. Check it out today, based on a true story podcast.com. And Dan, thanks for your sponsorship. The coffee is always delicious.
And the beauty of that is, if you think about it, 3 episodes, that's a deep dive. That is the epitome. Yeah. Without being AI, that's a deep dive, and it's just information you're not going to get in other places. So
and he does a great job. He's really, I think for podcasters, if you want to get a look at style, listening to other people's podcasts. I know sometimes we're so focused on our own and doing our own things, and I'm not talking about going copying someone else. I always want you to be yourself.
Right.
But I'm talking about listening to some components. Looks like my bandwidth may be struggling at the moment, but that's okay. We look at the components, the way they structure it, the way they put it together. There's a lot to learn by kind of digging in and listening to somebody else's podcast.
Yes, you want to be inspired. You do not want to rip off what they're doing. be
Yeah.
inspired by that. So
Be inspired by it.
yeah,
That's a fine line, by the way, between
yeah,
inspired and ripping off is a
yeah,
very fine
yeah. Uh, so I hired a business coach.
Ooh.
Why? Be
Wait a minute, hold on. Coaches need coaches? Is that
Coaches
what I'm
need
hearing?
coaches, yeah.
I
Tiger
agree. I
Woods
agree.
had a
Yeah,
coach.
yeah.
Michael Jordan had a coach. Yeah. And the guy asked me, he's like, "Why did you hire me?" I said, "Because I know there's low-hanging fruit that I can't see."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Okay." And he's like, and he came back, and my favorite one was you'd go to the School of Podcasting, and I had a button right there that was like, "Yes, I wanna launch my pod," and it took you right to a checkout page. Like, "Hey, glad you've been here 2 seconds. Give me $900." And it was like, I don't think that's really the way that's supposed to work. So, but what was funny is, and the thing I need that I'm not using right now is a, what do you call it when you have the page and then you have like the backstage version? And I could do this if I wanted to, but some websites have this, and I forget what it's called. It's a
Like a staging area or
staging
like
area. Yeah, I'm
okay, there you
missing,
go.
and I'm not using a staging. So I make change. Like last night, I made changes at about
Oh, right.
1 o'clock and went, all right, well, I'll fix that tomorrow. And I'm like, I realized for a couple of days the front page is going to be a little wonky, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Um, but he said I have a video on the left. He goes, you should move it to the right, and then put like some sort of headline here that ties in with that. In like, and the other thing is, again, my front page of School of Podcasting was pretty much the same exact page of the sales page. So you went from a sales page to a sales page. And he's like, really, the front page should explain what you can do for people and who Dave is and, why podcasting is cool, and then sell them on the School of Podcasting. And I'm like, hey, that makes sense. And all I wanted to do was move the video over and put text here. And I used everything I could figure out in, like, WordPress would let me put a video on the left and text on the right, but I'm like, oh, good, then I'll just switchy swatchy. No. And so it was just a lot of, and I'm like, wait a minute, I have the Elementor plugin, and Elementor will do your laundry. I mean, it's an amazing thing. I click on Elementor and I just get this spinning wheel, just like, hey, we're loading. And I was like, okay. And I look and I'm like, okay, everything's, So I reached out to Christian over at Maple Grove Partners. And I'm like, is there something on your back end that, like, I don't think so, but like, and he's like, no, and he gave me a bunch of code that I had no idea what it meant. So I went to Elementor and I'm like, hey, and to their credit, they got back pretty quick. And they're like, and this is where I was like, oh yeah, I am very rusty in WordPress. Do you remember the first thing you do when you're troubleshooting WordPress? You want to guess?
Disable all the plugins.
That's it. And I was like, oh, of course. So I disable all the plugins except Elementor. Hey, what do you know? Elementor's happy. And then you turn them all back on one by one. And the
One at a time.
One at a time. Refresh. One more.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, how did I forget this? And what was weird is I ended up turning them all back on and it was fine. But I did disable Divi because I don't know. There's probably one page on my site that I use Divi. So it's going to be a big ball of code. And I'm hoping someone will let me know that when they find it. But I was like, yeah, I'm not using. I know Mark is the Divi king. He uses that when he designs. But for me, I'm more of an Elementor person. And so if you're using WordPress, don't forget to, and here's what was really weird about this. It was Second Line Themes makes WordPress themes for podcasters. And they have some cool stuff that works with Elementor. And it's one of those where I'm like, did I dream this? Because, you're looking for the little red bubble that says, because I don't know about you, every time I log into WordPress, it's like, oh, you have 15 things that need updated. And you're like, oh, okay, hold on. And I didn't see that. Like, I kind of checked that box. Okay, everything is updated. And when I went to the second lines, when I actually went to my list of plugins, down by that plugin, it said, update available. And I was like, but I don't have a little number 1. There's an update available. And the minute I updated that, everything was fine. So, Jim has the question I want to know. Who still's using WordPress? Yeah, it's when they went to the block thing, I was like, ooh, I am feeling very human because I didn't like the block thing. Now it's gotten a lot better, but I was just kind of like,
It has gotten it has gotten better. Yeah,
yeah,
early on, it was messy,
yeah.
and,
Gutenberg was
they've
like,
yeah,
ooh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, they've cleaned
Um,
some things up.
and everybody thinks I hate WordPress now because of Podpage, but I will say I don't miss constant updates. I don't miss. I mean, I spend $150 a year now on WordFence for one website
Yeah.
because if I don't have WordFence on the School of Podcasting, it would get ugly quick. And I get things from WordFence on a regular basis saying, "Hey, a bunch of people in Germany are trying to hack your site," and I'm like, "Well, it's worth $150. I just wish I didn't have to worry about that."
Yeah.
Yeah. See, Daniel says I love the block editor, and that's
Yeah.
where I was kind of like, well, it's time to go through the learning curve because I still edit in the old thing, and I was like, maybe it's time to ditch that. And I do a site for my church, and I use a block editor, and then there's some other third party thing that adds more blocks and blah blah blah. And I was like, come on, old man, like get with the new stuff. But I was just surprised that the answer was turn off all your plugins, and I was like, oh, has it been that long since I've had to troubleshoot WordPress? So if you're a WordPress person and you're doing also, uh, you don't forget to back that thing up.
Mhm.
Most hosts have a backup, but I would have like I use WP managewp.com because the thing I like about that, because I've had to use it, is it's not just enough to back up the site. How easy is it to restore the site? And Manage WP, it's like super easy to restore your site. And I like them. And then they got by GoDaddy. They're still great, but they ditched their affiliate program. Um, Randy says your website WordFence just blocked me because I was looking around. Any pages not loading. I exceeded the maximum global request per minute. Well, there you go. That's exciting.
So it's a lot of clicking.
That's a lot of Randy's going to
A
town.
lot of clicking.
Randy set a bot at my site. On occasion, it will do things that, and it will block me, and then I have to go, no, it's me. It's okay. You know,
I
yeah.
use Updraft Plus for my backup, and that seems to work out. That seems to work out really, really well. They, I think I have a backup weekly. We've actually restored it one time. Christian and I, it was having some trouble. He's like, "You got a backup?" I was like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
you got a backup."
Yeah.
So we got that in, and so that's the thing on the backups, right? It's not a backup unless you've tested it.
And like, that's
Exactly.
it. It really
Yeah,
is.
it's
Uh,
not really a backup.
while we're talking WordPress and websites, there is a very stranged, I think I just made up a new verb. Stranged. It's a strangely named app, I guess we'll call it, service. It's Avocado, which everybody I know just calls it avocado because we don't want to throw in the extra N. It is, in fact, let me share my site. This is at AppSumo for $59 for a yearly thing. And they have some templates. So it's a pop-up maker. Or in my case, I didn't like, you can have it do fun things like like I could have the wheel of names on my website for your email address. And all of these are customizable. And I was using from Elegant Themes, which is the people that make Divi, their Bloom plugin for pop-ups. And it was okay. It was pretty, but it was like, and I wanted it. The thing I love is you can trigger this based on, let me go back into the one I made. You can trigger this if I just go next. Yeah. You can have, right now I have the algorithm figuring out when to put this pop up on. You can do an exit intent. So when people go to leave, they're like, hey, wait, what if I gave you a coupon? A ribbon trigger, which is always visible. So basically that's a little thing on the side. The thing I'm really looking forward to is they have click-based. So I could have a button that says sign up for the newsletter, click, and a little pop-up shows up. So for $59, I was like, definitely worth it. And the other thing I found out is as much as people love to, they wake up in the morning and like, I hope I can find a newsletter to sign up for today. I have been offering, free daily podcast tips for a very long time. And I would occasionally get people that would sign up. It's grown over the years. But my coach said, hey, people like stuff, and I said, okay. And he's like, do you have any lead mags? I go, well, I have a free course, schoolofpodcasting.com/baby steps that just walks people through kind of like, what's your podcast about? Where are you going to, all those questions that we answer here, I answer them in that free course. And I said, I've got a checklist. I've got all sorts of stuff. He's like, all right, we'll give them something. He goes, I'm here to tell you, you will get more emails if you give them something versus like knowledge. Like I was saying, hey, daily podcast tips. I think if you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/daily, you get daily podcast tips. And I would get, 4 leads a month doing daily podcast tips. I offered a free course and I've had a lead a day. Now I'm not gonna, that's nothing compared to the, mega marketers, but I'm like in a week, I've already got more leads than I have in a month. So if you're a person and you can tell Dave's getting into newsletter land. This is what I've been studying for like a couple weeks now. And Daniel says I use Elementor Pro for pop-ups. So yeah. And as much as we hate pop-ups, I learned this from working in Podpage because there's a built-in pop-up maker in Podpage. And the reason people use pop-ups is, that's right, they work. As much as we go, just don't be a weenie, like with that avocado thing. When I first made that little pop-up that I had, the X was ever so faint. It was almost the same color as the background. So you had to really look for it. And I'm like, I'm not going to be a weenie. And I could go in and say, look, make the close button black so I could see on a white background so people don't go like, I can't get this thing off my screen. I'm like, no, I don't want to be an annoying marketer. Like that's no good. So
it's a balance somehow, right? I mean, that stuff can be, I get super annoyed when I go to sites and
yeah.
And then when you can't get them to stop,
yeah,
that they just keep popping up. And you're like, come on. I think there's a balance in there somewhere between too early and too many.
yeah.
And as soon as I hit the site, I've seen some news sites that I've hit and the first scroll, boom, pops up and you're like, all right, that's a little too early. Right?
Yeah.
And then you click it off or you move away from it, you go to the next page and it pops up again. That's too many. And so I just, I know you don't want to miss that, but I think for most people, less is better, and so pop it up and get it done. I've had one popping up. I had one popping up advertising my newsletter, which I haven't written in 2 or 3 years. And nobody was signing up for it. So I'm like, well, this pop-up's not working. So I shut it off, right?
Yeah.
Because I just knew it wasn't getting, I was getting hits. I mean, I was getting folks coming to the site for whatever reason. What they were looking for was not a pop-up newsletter. So that's a good test, Dave, by the way, too, is, hey, to test that for a while. If it's not getting results, don't burden your audience with it. If you throw it out there and you just get 0 or very, very small returns on it, you've done it wrong, or your audience, that's not the way to reach them. So, turn that thing off. If you can, get those distractions out of the way. If they're not working, just because everybody else has a pop-up on their site doesn't mean you do too. Just because everyone else jumps off the cliff,
right?
Being my mom.
If Johnny Johnson jumps off the bridge, if I had a nickel,
you don't have to have a pop-up to be a podcaster.
Right.
Quote that one. That's it. That's the one. You don't have to have a pop-up to be a podcaster.
Yeah. Daniel says I use pop-ups deeper into the engagement or when someone is leaving. I'd like to show a pop-up. Yeah. The first impression, especially like the ones I have when I was doing it myself, I think you had to be on the site 45 seconds, which is, before it even, because the other thing I hate is when, well, let me get to this. Rich says, ugh, I hate a pop-up offering some kind of discount right when I arrive before I do anything. Seems like they're giving too much away too early. Yep, I would agree with that. The other one I hate is somebody has a sale or something and you get a great deal and then you sign up for the whatever, $17 thing and you go, great. It's like, oh, hey, this is the only time you will see this screen. We're offering 50% off the next thing. And you're like,
Yeah.
no, I actually just want to go play with the $17 thing I did. And then you go, no. And it's like, are you sure? We'll give you even more of a discount. Like, now you're trying too hard. And you're like, no, really, can I just get my thing and go? And then you click no. And it's like, wait, we've got another. And it's just offer after offer. And I'm like, can I just get my ebook and go home? And they're like, no, look, 40% off. You'll only see this once. Fear of missing out, off the chart. You must order. No, I just want the ebook. I'm going to go read it. So yeah, that's always fun. Jeff says the biggest thing that has grown my list isn't pop-ups, but Kit's recommendation engine. Yeah, I think that's why I get more signups at Substack. And that's the thing I'm trying to figure out, because I want to do, like, again, my coach says these things or he makes me say them out loud. He's like, so you have 4,000 people on SendFox. And I go, yeah. And he goes, and you're not emailing them? And I go, well, the daily people, the daily podcast tips people, but everybody else know that. I mean, I usually I give them their PDF and go, all right, thanks. Here's, I'm over there at the, he's like, oh, dude, you gotta, so that's always fun. Dan says pondering pet peeves of pop-ups is fun to say, and is a good test of popping peeves for podcasters. Yeah, the whole thing. Pondering the pet peeves of pop-ups is a good test for popping peeves of podcasters. Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah. Rich says, yeah, Magi got me with that. This is the only time you'll see this trick. And I subbed for a year. Yeah, well, sometimes it's, they get you. But yeah, that was that one. And then, of course, I did promise this.
And now it's time for a power rant.
All right. I saw this morning and I was like, oh, come on. All right. So long story short, I had a podcast through Anchor. All right. That's okay. We won't hold that against you. And I haven't logged in for a while. And now I'm trying to get everything updated to Spotify for creators. But wait, there's more. Well, I cannot import my Anchor podcast over because according to Spotify customer service, there's Spotify customer service? Okay, they said it. My RSS was shut off by Whooshka, which was bought by Spotify. And he says, but Whooshka also doesn't exist any longer and is now Megaphone by Spotify. So it's really weird to me that they can't help me. Acted like Whooshka is a separate thing. Well, it kind of is. And that my account doesn't exist anywhere in the Megaphone system. Megaphone's contact form is useless. It's a useless ploy to drum up business. You can't actually ask them a question to get help. Is anyone in a similar boat that can explain how I can get my RSS feedback? But here's the thing that I just was like, wait, what? It starts off after saying all this stuff. What's he trying to do? I'm trying to move Anchor, which was bought by Spotify, to Spotify for creators. I'm like, no, you're like, it's like, he only beats me a couple times a week. No, you don't go back to that guy. Well, get away from that guy. You got to be kidding me. I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. So, and I told him, I said, look, go to castfeedvalidator.com. That's owned by Blueberry now. Click on the Find My Feed and type in the name of your show. That should, if it's available, unless they just wiped it off the planet, give you your feed, which you can then import into something like Captivate or Buzzsprout or Libsyn or Blueberry. Do not, I was just like, you got to be kidding me. But that,
practically speaking, you just nuke the thing and start over, right? I mean, yes, okay. I mean, you could go through all the work to try to find it and get it back, whatever. Chances are, between all those purchases and conversions and stuff being shut down, I don't know how many downloads you had before, but it's not worth it.
right.
Just nuke it, start over. Sometimes that's just easier,
Yeah, he said, long story short, it didn't say how long he had it, but yeah, like for me, I'm always like, well, try to get the RSS feed so you're not really starting from zero. But if you go to that tool and it's like, then it's like, well,
start over.
But that brings up this other one, which isn't quite power rant worthy, but it is one that I was like, oh, come on, kids, like really? And he says, I use Blogger to make my podcast feed, and it's not updating anymore. And it's kind of like, hey, my 8-track tape player isn't playing the tape. I'm like, come on. So I'm still using Blogger to launch new episodes for my podcast. It's an old one. Yeah, you think? So that's why I'm still there. Yesterday, I wanted to post a new episode using archive.org. Come on, kids. But it's not showing on my feed. Does anyone know if anything happened recently? Thanks for the help. Oh, by the way, this is my feed. And that's right. He's using FeedBurner. And I was just like, okay, so with this one, look, maybe back in the day, I never, ever recommended using archive.org for a media host. I was like, that's not really what it's for. Can you do it? Sure. But I was like, that's not really a media host.
No,
But
they were
okay.
down for 2 weeks at the end of the year. I
Yeah.
mean, actually more. I think it was a whole month.
Yeah. And
You know?
Blogger, I'm like, it's just time. And so I told him, I said, look, if you need free, do not use Spotify. I go, there is Red Circle. I go, but really, like Captivate, Buzzsprout, Blueberry Lipson, you know, hobbies cost money. And you should be able, I said, if you can get your feed, import it into one of those tools, and then update your FeedBurner if you want to stay with FeedBurner, which I remember years ago we were all like
Oof.
over under on when it was going to go out of business. They did kind of update it,
Yep.
and that's
Yep.
when he said, well, how do I update my FeedBurner? And that again is kind of one of those where if you don't remember your FeedBurner login, and you know, I'm sure there's a password reset over there, but for me, if I lost my FeedBurner login, I mean, that's a email I used 20 years ago.
I
And I'm
think Google consumed that into their own. I think you now log into FeedBurner with your Google
Google
account.
account.
I don't,
Yeah.
I don't think it's. I don't. I think it's. I
But
think.
if you didn't have a Google account back in 2005,
Well,
I
you
was
had
like,
to associate it. At one point, I think you had to switch it,
okay.
and I think I'm trying to remember. This was like 1,000 years ago,
Well, that's it.
but
I was
yeah,
like, is
yeah.
this kind of like, you know,
The site
back
looks
in
like
the
an
day?
intern. The site looks like an intern built it. Just to be honest, like I mean, I'm pretty sure the FeedBurner conversion was done by an intern. So, you know, I did you see the link on that though? It was feedburner.com/VHS podcasts, VHS. Like,
No.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it
on the
is.
link. Yeah, the
VHS
link.
podcast, VHS. Oh my
Okay,
goodness.
listen, we're judging and we should
I
not
mean,
be judging. You
it
can
still
podcast about
works.
anything. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
here's my
Yeah.
FeedBurner.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
none of these have, you know, but you
Look
can
at that.
see,
Look how Spartan that is. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's still there. What happens if I sign out? What's the front page of this thing? Okay, now if I go to feedburner.com.
No,
Oh,
it
it makes you
it's
log
a
in. All
Google
right.
property. They've fully integrated it at this point. I haven't been out there in 1,000 years, so it's, you know,
Uh,
it's there. It's still there. I think maybe that conversion was automatic. I don't know.
Well, it's weird
I'm
because they did update it for a bit because I had I felt all important. I had a super secret, can't talk about it meeting with Google. And they're like, yeah, we're gonna revive, we're gonna update FeedBurner. And they're like, we like your opinion. And I'm like, are you sure I'm the guy you want to talk to? Like, you know, because I'm like, well, it does this, it does. There were some things that FeedBurner didn't do well, and I explained it to them, and I think they somewhat updated it. But yeah, I haven't been back, you know, since Obama was in office, to look at it. And yeah,
I
so
was thinking George Bush the first
that's
time around. That's what
it. 1,000 points of FeedBurner.
I
Yeah.
not gonna do it.
Not gonna do
Not gonna do it.
it.
Not gonna do it.
Not gonna update. Nope. Yeah. So to me, and look, I get it. You know, if it's working, and this really the the thing that gets me is like, when do I move off a platform? When it quits working. And your blogger archive.org FeedBurner thing, you know, I get it. It's all free, but you know, again, if you're only doing an episode every now and then, Libsyn has a $7 a month plan. Like that's, you know, come on, kids. You know, hobbies cost money, and that's not gonna, skip one Starbucks out of the month and you've paid for it. Yeah.
One? That's
Yeah.
barely one.
Yeah, it's true. If you don't get any,
Yeah,
whatever.
I know.
Chris says the name Spotify for creators is actually the complete opposite of what they're for. More accurately, Spotify for advertisers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
pretty accurate, Chris. Yeah, it's pretty
I've
accurate.
watched this guy now on Facebook. I think he's on YouTube, called Sync Money, and he's all about how musicians really the way they can make money now is through sync licensing. So you're basically licensing your music for Netflix and other things like that. But they keep popping up with stats about just how incredibly just David Letterman used to call I think it was TV executives weasels or something like that. And the music business is just a bunch of weasels. And plus, um, it's I just go and this, because it was like, oh, I'm gonna work with Spotify and blah, but I'm like, go Google what percentage of Spotify is owned by the record industry, and I'm like, it's a sizable chunk, and I'm like, these are really the people, you know. And Rich says, wasn't FeedBurner a good thing? It was in 2005.
No, Google, a Google thing.
Oh, Google thing. Oh yeah,
It is
sorry.
a good, yeah, it is a good thing. It was a good thing.
Good
It's
thing,
now
yeah.
a Google thing. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel says it's still a good way to turn a non-podcast feed into a podcast feed, like from Blogger. Yeah, it has its thing. I'm just like, I would just say move off a Blogger. Come on. Yeah.
I can't believe that's still around.
Yeah. If you're a geek like Randy, I've cut my hosting fees down to less than $2 a month, building my own CDN. That's all you have to do. And hosting static websites through Cloudflare. I built my feed using sovereign feeds. Yeah, I remember when I first tried Amazon something for hosting, and you had buckets. I just remember that. And I went from paying Libsyn, whatever it was, $20 a month. And I remember like my first month was something ridiculous, like 37 cents. It was really, really cheap. And then I added another episode and another episode and another episode. And you got to remember, when people find your episode, they will download, in some cases, the whole back catalog. And I finally quit. I think my bill went up to like $34. And I was like, all right, that's enough of that experiment. But that again was also, man, probably in 2008, something like that. So yeah, Chris says it's throwback, Thursday. Blogger, what's next? Microsoft front page running Netscape Navigator. Get off my lawn. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's some old technology there. And that it also, I did this thing. One of the things that, and I always hate this, but when you get into marketing, someone's going to tell you, you have to tell them your story. And I'm always like, I don't know that people really need to know my story. But last night it was funny. So I'm working on this email thing that will include my story. Well, my story's 20 years long. And the story was like 4.5 pages. I'm like, nobody's reading this. That's ridiculous. But it's funny how, marketing and, things change over time. And so maybe they don't need my story to identify with me and figure out if they want to work with me. And, I was a shy kid that got fired at the age of 16, blah, blah, blah. So, maybe go back and check to see if what you were doing 10 years ago is still working.
Listen, I'll disagree with you a little bit, not very strongly, just to be honest, but I'll disagree with you a little bit. I do think people want to know your story, but I don't think it's the first time they meet you. I think it's after they've been listening to you for a while.
I agree with that.
So, bury that thing a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying do it on purpose, but that's not your lead magnet. Your story, listen, this is going to sound insensitive, but nobody cares about people they don't know yet. Like, it just isn't there. They need to get to know you, right? And so have it out there. I think, listen, your 4-page story, Dave, on your site somewhere is not a bad thing to have. One, it's probably got good SEO. Two, in the world of generative AI search, it's important. Like AI is going to pick up some of that stuff. And if it can associate it with you, Well, I mean, yeah, I'm assuming you posted it, so you want it out there. So I don't think it's a bad idea to have a long, have a long version of your story. Some folks who've been listening to you for a while get really geeked out by that. They're like, "Oh, that's why he says the things he does.
Yeah.
That's why he," right? And so I don't think it's a bad idea to have it. It's just not a lead magnet. I think this is the people think like, "Oh yeah, my story's interesting." Not really, to be honest. We all have a story. I mean, it is. It's more interesting after I've gotten to know you.
Yeah. Well, oh crap. Joe Polizzi, from used to the creator of Content Marketing Incorporated. He now does a newsletter called The Tilt that is a must read for me every Monday, I think it is. Um, and yes, Mental Mayhem says, "Can we ask a question?" Yes. We'll take any questions, or up here, askthepodcastcoach.com/question will pop you into the video. We just prefer you're wearing pants or clothes or things like that. But yeah, he said people don't care about you until you give them a reason to care. And so when you start off and you're like, I was born, my dog's name was Butch and blah, blah, blah. We don't care. But the minute I say, oh, here's some steps you can use that might actually grow your podcast, they're like, oh, who is this guy? So you have to give them some reason to kind of like you and want to know more.
Yeah, nobody like when you had Bernie on,
Yeah.
like it then all of a sudden people want to know like, oh, who is this? Who is Bernie the cat? Well, then a little bit of a little bit of background on Bernie is
Yeah.
appropriate at that point. But to have a newsletter and lead with Bernie the cat, people are like, wow, well, the history. I don't even know who this cat is, right? So I think just don't get the cart before the horse on that one. Still have it. Just don't get the cart before the horse. It's
Yeah.
not a lead magnet. Let people find it in your about.
Yeah, Stephanie from nosyaf.com. I hate when people do that on YouTube videos. I don't care you're a father of three. Just show me how to make the pivot table.
Exactly.
That's all I need. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always kind of crazy with that. But it was interesting because it was kind of, as much as we're all focused on, I want to grow my audience, which we are, but don't forget to maybe look at where you are, because you forget like where you've come from. Like I was going through this and I was like, oh, I totally forgot that I went to college, got a degree in electronics, fell into teaching for 10 years, won employee of the year, and then got laid off. And I was like, wait, but I'm employee of the year. Why? How can you lay me off? And then I went to get a job in teaching, which I'd been doing for 10 years. And they're like, yeah, we can't even talk to you without a teaching degree. And I'm like, but I have a degree. They're like, yeah, in electronic engineering. And so I had to start over and go back to school, and which I'm going to tie into podcasting now. So your history and your experience helps make up who you are and how you attack things. And this is something we always say, and I saw a great example of this, and you're probably going to hear me talk about this in the School of Podcasting, but I always say, people are like, well, how can I make my show different? And the default is, well, you are going to make it different because of your history and your experiences and your insights and your opinions. But man, did I see two great examples of this. Were you much of a Smashing Pumpkins fan by any chance?
No, not at all.
Me neither. I was like, he was the guy that outed all my great 80s hair bands, right? But Billy Corrigan is a guy who is the lead singer of Smashing Pumpkins, who was very popular. I mean, they were on Lollapalooza and this, and also Barry, that dude's name, Billy, is very opinionated and will admit that his opinions got him into some hot water. But he's now interviewing some of his idols, as is, do you remember Richard Marx?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Richard Marx has a show, and these are both YouTube channels. And I think Billy's might be a podcast. And I wish I could remember the names of them. I know Richard Marx is something like a story to tell. And what was interesting about it is Billy knows what it's like to be really famous and to have the power of fame, and and he's interviewing Gene Simmons. Well, it turns out Billy is a huge Kiss fan, and he's interviewing what appears to be one of his idols, and just asked all sorts of questions about the music biz and this and that. And what was interesting is he said, Kiss was never really lifted up as a great band musically, like musical talent. He goes, obviously Paul's a great singer. He goes, but Peter Criss on the drums and Ace and he's like, did you ever feel slighted like that? Like, I know people, it took a while for you guys to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in total Gene Simmons' answer, he goes, well, I actually thought about buying the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was his way of saying, look, I got what I wanted, lots and lots of money. I don't really care about that kind of stuff. And then on the Richard Marx thing, he and Paul Stanley, because Paul Stanley's like 70-ish now, and he was talking about how they went to do their last ever tour because he and Gene were like, look, we're athletes on stage, and we're getting old, and we can't do this at the level we want to do it, which, God bless him. I mean, I love Paul McCartney, but that performance on Saturday Night Live made me cry a little bit because my hero's losing his voice and kind of already has. Yeah. And so Paul Stanley talks about how they went to do their last tour and COVID hit. And he's like, look, that was the last tour because we're kind of losing the ability to put on the show we want. And he goes, and then COVID came and tick, 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 clock is still, he goes, I'm still getting older. He goes, that didn't stop. And so they talked about how do you handle going from being famous and touring and having 20,000 people think you're amazing, and now you're home and you got to take out the garbage. And so they started talking about what they've learned in therapy. And I was like, okay, this is a question I don't think you're going to get on other shows. So based on who you are, but also I don't really like Billy Corgan. I've heard some of the things he said with his opinion. I think he is a little bit, he will, I don't, it's kind of a bad word, but it's his word. And he goes, look, in the 2000s, I was a dick. He goes, that's what it was. And I kind of think that, but the more I watch his show, the more I'm like, this guy's actually pretty smart. And so he interviewed like Sharon Osbourne and things like that. So if you're thinking I should do a show, but I can't because somebody else is already talking about that subject, if you can come at it from a different angle, because both these guys, I was like, I don't really want to watch this. And then I started listening to it in the background and I was like, hey, this isn't a bad show. Like he spent, he interviewed Sharon Osbourne, and these are like an hour and a half. And for probably the first 45 minutes, he just talked about Sharon Osbourne's dad because he was like this big music executive and kind of hard-handedly managed people. And it was interesting because people were saying, your dad's a bad guy. He's not good for, he treats his artists like crap. And she goes, I was really good friends with Jeff Lynne from ELO. We would hang out. And the one day he looked at me and said, well, your dad owes me $4 million. And she was like, no. And she goes, and then I found out he did. And she goes, and so there were years where she was really estranged from her dad because she's like, hey, you're not. So if you're thinking about that, it's also the power of asking different questions. So
I think Metal Mayhem may be in the maybe waiting.
Oh,
you see
I do not.
Oh,
let me make sure here because I didn't hear him come in.
Okay,
but
he said he was go. So you go right. We're on. What are we on? We're on ECAM. Do they have to sign in to get?
No, you should just click that button and
type
in your name and click on join or something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because I have it set now to go bring or whatever in the background. Because I remember the one time I was watching the replay or something, and I saw where somebody was sitting in the back end for, yeah. So if you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/ here, I'll even do this. I saw it blink.
Oh, that's because that was my fault.
Sorry. I will be crazy, and that is the direct link to. That's basically what Ask the Podcast Coach. He says I'm here. Yeah, we don't see you.
That's okay. Sometimes we have technical problems with it. You can throw your question in chat. We can.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the interview screen. I see me and I see Jim. I wonder what's going on. Interesting. But try that link I just put in the chat. But The joys of live. Yeah, it keeps blinking. Like my little box, it has me and Jim on the back end of this. Every now and then it goes and blinks like, oh. And I'm like, but I've got it expanded now. I thought, well, maybe I've somehow haven't made the box big enough to see him, but I have it set to make, like when you joined it, whatever, 10:15, I heard this like
Yeah.
ring noise. Cause I'm like, I don't want to have people joining me, like
Yeah.
completely ignore them. Stephanie has a question while we're waiting for Metal Mayhem. If you have an idea for a show that's somewhat related to your current one, do you think it makes more sense to start a whole new show? Nope. Or could you weave a few episodes of the topic in occasionally? Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things, starting a new show. The problem is now that we've done one, it's easy, right? Okay. All I need is artwork. If I'm using Captivate, I can just start a second show, no additional cost. And, I've got microphones, I've got stuff. Okay. But you still have to promote another show. You still have to try to grow another show. And if it's on the same thing, like I'm working on an episode right now about marketing, and if you're running your podcast as a business, and just saying that, I realize that there's a pretty big chunk of my audience that doesn't run their podcast like a business. And I at first was like, I'm not even sure if I should do this episode. And when I looked into it, and I interviewed Steve Stewart. So this is coming. I'm just working on the episode. I was like, wait a minute, I got to make this a little more, because it's math. Like there's nothing more fun in an audio podcast than lots of math, right? It's just, people will just immediately fall asleep. So I'm like, all right, I need to come up with a story that I can work the math into. And so I found one, first from Ray Edwards. So spoiler alert, Ray Edwards made millions of dollars a year for 7 years and went bankrupt. That's what caught my eye. And I was like, okay. So in the process, and then I interviewed Steve, and Steve brought some great stuff about this thing called Profit First, which is a great book by Mike Michalowicz. And it's fun to just say Michalowicz. Go ahead, try it. It's fun. And I was like, And I was like, I'm not going to put out this episode until I go through this. So I got a hold of, finally, after Ralph forever going, hey, I can help you with that whole LLC S Corp thing. So I started the process of becoming, an official business, as opposed to just for 20 years, just going, yeah, I need to do that every year. Yeah, I need to do that. And so I'm actually going through the process. So that episode will come out when it's there. But and Ralph says, it's not about math, Dave. It's the stress, emotions, and potential pain caused by not running it as a business. Well, I'm running into people and myself that it's easy if you are, like, I would just claim it as whatever it is, additional income. And I would just go, oh, it's a tax write-off. I'll buy a microphone. It's just I like literally, and again, I'm doing half the show now, but I did this this week, and I went into GoDaddy and I said, show me domains that are up for renewal in the next 30 to 60 days. And I canceled 7. So domains is something that it's kind of, oh, Dave, he's addicted to domains. Yeah, it's not funny when you finally go, wait, how much did I spend last year on domains that I'm not using? So you got to be careful with that.
But you could use them someday. That's the hard part, right?
Well, that's it.
I may have something that could hit,
podcastcollaboration.com. I owned it, not anymore. I'm going to try to sell these, but I was like, really?
Who bought it?
Nobody.
It?
Right now, it's waiting to expire.
Okay.
So it will be available in a month or so. But Stephanie.
Go ahead. I want to answer Stephanie's question too, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I think, one of the things we do a lot at Gallup with new ideas is just run them as a test through the current channel or channels. We have a couple different channels we can run them through. So if we're thinking of doing something new, I always just say, well, let's just try it once before we get married to this thing. Like, let's go on a date and we'll try it and get some audience feedback on it and run it down. You don't have to make a big deal about it. Just get the content out there, run it down your current, your current stream, your current feed, and maybe even ask for some feedback. if it's going to be radically different, warn the audience that, hey, we're doing this as a test. We'd love your
Yeah.
feedback on it. Send feedback to whatever at whatever. And get some, you may do it once and then go, or you may do it a couple times and go, maybe there's not enough
Mm,
content. I think sometimes, Dave, we think that we got the greatest idea and there's 1,000 episodes, and you got a great idea, but there's 3 episodes
yeah.
in it, right? And you get down that path. I had an old pastor friend of mine back when I used to do some church work. He used to say, don't actually do something until you see a big demand. I mean, almost let the demand force it to happen. And so, it was real wise advice of like, don't create a new program until you've got some real demand pent up for it, where everybody's asking, hey, if I could just get this type deal. So, Stephanie, I'd test it out through the feed if you can before you make the decision. Then once you get it going, I follow the guys over at One Nation Under Whiskey. I listen to those guys, and they started a podcast, then they moved it to YouTube, then they started another podcast, then they stopped, then they started, so they had 2 going, and they were doing 2 YouTube, and then for a while in their feed, it was all in one feed, and then they stopped doing the podcast feed, and it was only available on YouTube. I know why they did that. They were trying to push people to their YouTube channel, right?
Right.
Because YouTube's way easier to monetize than a podcast, right? For most people.
Yeah.
I'm hearing people screaming at me now in the
Easier,
car. Yeah, yeah.
not
I think
easy, easier.
easier, right? Yeah, easier. And in most cases, I think. So that gets me out of the one person that's making more money on their podcast than they are on YouTube. But and then they went back. Then they stopped doing the podcast altogether, the second podcast. And there was such backlash. They were like, guess what? It's coming back. So they're constantly now. Do you want to do that much movement? I don't know. That's a lot of
Yeah.
it's a lot of audience change, right? To try and you get them coming back, going left, going right. Would I do that much change? Probably not. They did. They're doing fine. They're doing fine with it. But test it out before
Yeah.
you.
An example too is sometimes like Lee Silverstein had the colon cancer podcast.
Mm-hmm.
No guessing what that show's about, right? It's about colon cancer. And after about, I don't know, 5 years or so, he rebranded it and to We Have Cancer, because he wanted to talk about not just colon cancer, but he realized that when anybody in your family has cancer, everybody in the family, like that affects the whole family. And so he rebranded it to We Have Cancer, and it allowed him to expand it a little bit, but they were still talking about cancer and treatment and just the mental stress of living with cancer. And so, I mean, if all I did was talk about, microphones and bandwidth and downloads, and, that would drive me crazy. But that's why I hang out in Reddit groups and Facebook groups, because the more you know your audience,
Yeah.
the more how far you can, like, I realize, look, and I'm kind of like, not all of my audience is running their podcast as a business, but there are other like lessons in there that
Yeah.
even if you're not running your podcast as a business, you could do. So that's coming in a couple weeks. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is, am I going to tie that into newsletter stuff? Because that's kind of adjacent, because that kind of applies. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think newsletters are going to be its own episode. But I'm always kind of, it all comes back to knowing your audience. That's how you make decisions over your content. And that's just, draw up an avatar. And sometimes it applies to, that's where I always say I don't drink my own coffee or I don't eat my own cat food. How does that go? Whatever it is.
Dog food.
Dog
But
food.
dogs eat dog food. We drink champagne. That's what
There
we
you
say.
go.
Drink your own champagne.
Is, I know there are times that I have beginners who are trying to start their podcast, but a large chunk of my audience already has a podcast. They're trying to grow it. So anytime I do, and I will probably do a disclaimer on that show and say, hey, today's show is for those people that are running their podcast as a business. If you're not running your podcast as a business, this isn't for you, but it is a fun story. Well, it's not a fun story, but it can be a fun story. So it's one of those things where, I'm willing to take a shot on that if it's good. And that's what I'm working on right now. Cause when Steve and I did a great conversation, but I was like, oh, this is like, it's my stuff. And I'm not like on the edge of my seat. And I was like, how can I make this more entertaining as well as educational? And I was like, oh, we need a story. And that's when I went, well, I got to go through this then. I can't ask my audience to do something that I haven't done. And so I'm in the process of doing that kind of stuff.
Oh, Dave, the statement that you just made about can't lead, this is the way I say it. I can't lead people to places I've never been before.
Right.
It's so important. I mean, if you're in the advice space, I see this all the time of folks, we see this in the podcast space all the time. Folks never done anything before and they're giving advice
Right.
on it. And you're kind of like, you should probably go there. You should probably try it yourself before you get too far on this thing, and so if you're gonna, if you're gonna take folks down a path, you gotta be I think my opinion is you gotta be doing it yourself too.
Well, what's interesting is there are business checking accounts, and I was ready to recommend one, and I've been contacting their support because I'd like to be an affiliate, because I think it's a really great service. And I was like, oh, cool. And then I saw they had an affiliate program, and I signed up on the 11th. It's the 22nd, and I'm still not approved. And I was like, hey, anything you guys need from me? Like, what's the deal? And it's been crickets. And I'm like, so I actually reached out to the support team and said, hey, I realize it's a different department, but can you go kick somebody in affiliates and say, hey, Dave wants to be an affiliate and he's going to be a customer, and that's the other thing. I'm like, I was going to use this company as a customer, but if this is your support, no. And then their competitor did a webinar and answered a bunch of questions. And when I emailed them, they got right back. And I'm like, we might have a new favorite, because I don't want to recommend somebody if they're not going to support their product. I mean, that's no good. So that's where I'm kind of glad that I was like, let me go through this first. And that whole thing is. So Mental Mayhem. I am too reliant on AI tools like Grammarly, Descript, OpenScript, and ChatGPT for everything from titles to blogging and SEO. Okay.
Am I? Yes.
Yes.
Can you be too dependent on those things? What are the dangers of using that maybe too much or without checking the human element of it?
Yeah. I find myself talking to the chat robot more than friends, family, etc. Yeah.
Two different issues there, by the way.
Yeah.
Two different issues, right?
For me, when I say write an article about such and such, it does. It's not bad. Not really in my voice. Even I know I could go into ChatGPT and say, this is Dave, and here are 5 blogs from Dave, and it will kind of sound like me.
Mm-hmm.
I am more of, let me write the blog. Now, here's the thing. Writing has never been, content creation is not a problem for me, right? Give me an idea. Give me a half an hour, and I will spit out a blog post. And it's me. It's 100% Dave. What I do then is take that and go ChatGPT, like, make this better. And then I look at it and go, is it better? And if it is, and it's still me, I'll use it. But if it, all of a sudden I'm deep delving into blah, I'm like, no. Like, hold on. So I'm a fan of having it take something you wrote and kind of beef it up a bit. I'm not a huge fan of letting it, but what I do sometimes is I will say, here's my transcript from my episode. Give me 10 episode titles. Mm-hmm. And almost 9 times out of 10, I will take part of 1 and part of number 6 and, oh, wait a minute. And then something that it then sparked an idea. So I use it as a brainstorming tool.
Yeah. I've heard folks say the best explanation is use it like you'd use an intern, which is, I think, is a great explanation for it. You're doing the thought, you're doing you're doing the human part of it. But from a generation standpoint, it's getting really good. So I certainly would not discourage you from using it. Your second question's a little different in that if you're spending time on it, more than your friends and your family. Now I'm sure that was a joke, right?
Right.
You said LOL at the end there. So that's, that's not bad. Just, just be careful with it. But too much of it, like, this is where you need to measure what kind of engagement are you getting with it. As an example, I wrote a bunch of articles over at the Average Guy.tv using it when it first came out. And Christian pinged me. He's my web host guy and friend. He's like, "Are you writing a bunch of AI articles?" Like, he picked them out right away. And in the I even that early, I wasn't as in tune to the similar structure. Like, AI now is pretty easy to pick out in somebody's writing. You can kind of tell. And even my editor at work is like, yeah, it's too flowery, and it's too, like, it tries to be impressive with too many words sometimes, right? Some of those things. So I think yes, it can help with our workflows. It's a great assistant. Be careful that the content you take from it, it's just not completely copy paste. Now, physician heal thyself, when I do some show notes for Home Gadget Geeks, I take some of that stuff, just copy and paste. I'm not too worried about it.
Right.
At this point, I know it's deep in the show notes. Nobody's reading it at that point. I put it there just so in the future I have it. But you said LOL as a laugh in there, but be careful with that. I mean, these assistants, they're getting really good at talking to you. So be cautious of how much time.
It's much better to talk to your audience.
For sure. Oh, that's great.
That way you're not guessing what the audience wants. You know exactly. Yeah. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, where I gave it a transcript of me and Daniel J. Lewis in the future of podcasting. And I said, hey, like, and I had the audio thing on. I'm like, what did you think? And it had a couple points like, hey, you guys could do a summary. Sometimes you use jargon, and the new person may not know that. So it gave me some things that were okay, but it's also a robot, and it doesn't have emotions. And I was laughing because I watched The Karate Kid on Netflix, because I do a thing where I only have one streaming service at a time, going back to money. And so I was like, wait, before I ditch Netflix for Apple so I can go watch whatever that one show is, Severance, I want to go watch season 2. And I'm like, oh, crap, I'm in the middle of Karate Kid. So I binge it. And I was laughing because, that show knows who their audience is. And their audience is the people that watched it in 1984. Yes, it has a whole new audience, but they always tip their hat to 1984. And I was laughing because they did a montage. They talked about Rocky, and then they kind of recreated the Rocky one where Rocky's running through the city and people are high-fiving him and that whole 9 yards. And they had the most cheesiest 80s music ever. It just sounded like somebody making fun of the 80s. It was like, run for the gun, you're gonna make it. And it just really, synthesizer and blah, blah. And my favorite was, at one point, it would be like this, okay? So I'm going to hold up a Zoom PodTrack P4. It was like this. They started the scene like this, but it was this little, it looked like a tennis racket, but instead of a tennis racket, they had this thing you would kick. And I believe the brand was Champion. And I was like, I'm like, what a weird way to start this montage. And I was like, oh, look, kids, it's product placement. It was just obvious product placement. And, but that's one where they know their audience and they're dealing to it. And so you got to be careful. The other thing it did, though, because I'm like, why was I talking about the Karate Kid? Because ChatGPT doesn't feel nostalgic. It doesn't do that. It doesn't have emotions.
Unless you tell it to.
Right.
The emotions bit, it's not very good at. It can be, it's cheesy nostalgic when you do that. You're like, you could say in the prompt and write it like it's a look back to the 80s.
Right. And then it's going to go gag me with a spoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I'm referring to. The grunt work, titling, show description, keyword placement, length of titles, YouTube.
It knows. Listen, it knows how to do good writing. It's good at writing. That's the, it uses. Even I was checking my show notes from this week, and I let it do some stuff, and it uses these words, especially if it thinks it's a podcast. It dives deep. There's an
Always.
AI, right?
And
Or
delves.
delving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Delves into or in a world or in an ever-changing world. Those are also kind of dramatic things it always starts with. And you can kind of, I had it generate 5 articles for me, all on different subjects, and it started them all with "in an ever-changing world." Every single one started with that phrase. In an ever-changing world. It tries to be dramatic, right? So, um, great tool, does great stuff. It's an intern. You need to edit and monitor, and you should not necessarily all the time be just copy and pasting in there.
And always, always, always read it before you post it, because I still love
Oh, for sure.
the one thing it was talking about podcasting, and it said podcasting's had a findability problem going back to the 90s. And I was like, oh, really? Because, it wasn't around in the 90s. That is a findability problem.
The
Because it
internet
didn't
was
exist.
barely around in the 90s. Let's just be clear about
Yeah.
that. Stephanie says maybe tell chat to cut the dramatics down a bit, right?
Just a bit.
So,
You can do that.
don't be so dramatic.
Yeah.
Be
You
professional.
You know who's not dramatic?
Our awesome
supporters. That's right. And I just realized I don't have the wheel of names. We'll have to do the wheel of names from scratch today.
Oh, I like it.
That'll be fun. And I'm clicking on the button. There we go. So yeah, you can be an awesome supporter by going to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, where you have courses, you have coaching, you have a absolutely brilliant community. You can use the coupon code COACH when you sign up. And of course, that comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you go to Ask the Podcast Coach, well, you're looking at Podpage, and you can try Podpage by going to trypodpage.com. That is my affiliate link. And if you want to learn Podpage, go to learnpodpage.com. We're live streaming today, as we always do, using Ecamm Live. You can check it out at askthepodcastcoach.com/Ecamm. And that's 2 M's on Ecamm, because it's good. And if you want more Jim Collison, and who doesn't want more Jim Collison, then go over to theaverageguy.tv, or for something different, check out homegadgetgeeks.com. Shh, it's the same thing. And check out his show. So yeah, we're going to go to the screen, and there's a lovely forest. And let's go. Now I'm probably going to have to, this is usually, we lucked out. Yay, cookies. The wheel of names is ready to go. So these are our $20 supporters, because we're a rebel, because I think that breaks Patreon terms, but we don't care. Is it going to be Jody? Is it the ladies over at Keep the Flame Alive? Is it Ed Sullivan at Sonic Cupcake? Who is it? Well, we're going to click shuffle, and we're going to click on spin, and round it goes. Where it stops, it's going to be, hey, did I predict this? It's Jody Kringle from the Audio Branding Show. The hidden gem of marketing. Check her out. I'll have a link to that out in the show notes. And if you need voiceover work, she's pretty good, because she's worked for people like, I don't know, Coke, as in like a cola.
What?
Yeah. And there was one, Fancy Feast. She's worked with a ton. It's one of those things you're like, hey, I've heard that commercial. And then it dawns on you like, hey, I know her. Holy cow, that's crazy. And she's awesome. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And if this show, well, did we save you time today? Did we save you money? Did we save you some headaches maybe? Did we keep you educated? Did we keep you inspired to keep on podcasting? Well, then consider going over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome and becoming an awesome supporter today. And don't forget, when you first sign up, we give you a big giant shout out as a way of saying thanks for becoming an awesome supporter. So keep that in mind.
Hey, big thanks to Metal Mayhem. They just dropped a $10 super chat. So
there we go. Yay. Thank you.
Done.
Yes. Coca-Cola, as in coming to a Costco near you, says Daniel. Excellent. Yeah, it's everybody's saying Jody is awesome. She is. She's amazing. Randy says, in terms of AI, remove uncommon words.
Ooh, that's a good prompt.
Yeah.
Ask it, by the way, what are good prompts? It'll generate prompts for you. Like, hey, I want to do this. What's a good prompt? And it will give you what it thinks it needs to do the prompt. And if you give it a prompt and it gives you the wrong answer, tell it it's wrong and it'll do it again. And sometimes it gets it right the second time. That's crazy right there. So I had a friend ask it to write some code and the code didn't work. And he said, yeah, that's not the right code. And so it said, oh, I'm sorry. Let me try again. And the second try was correct.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What I've done is I'll say, give me 10 episode titles for this. And then I look through it. And like I say, a lot of times I'll Frankenstein one together. But if there is one that I like, and how do I know if I like it? It's a simple test. Which one makes me want to click it more? That's my test. And so I'll see one. I'm like, I kind of like number 8. And then I'll go, which title do you like best? And why? And it'll be like, I like number 8 because it's specific and blah, blah, blah. It has a fear of missing out, whatever it is. And it'll explain why it thinks it's the best. And then sometimes it'll go, but also number 3 was good because it does this and that. It depends on what you're doing. And I was like, that's always kind of interesting. Daniel says, sometimes talking to AI feels like talking to overseas tech support. Yes, in some cases, depending on who it is. I always tell people, it's interesting times that we live in. I've popped my popcorn and I'm here to watch. I saw a thing, video that, I can't remember the name of it. It was, Think Media, Sean something on YouTube. And he went in and just typed a prompt and it made like a 2-minute video. And he said something about, what would happen if, Indiana Jones went to Area 51. Oh. And it was this cartoon of him climbing a fence and then going in through this cool tunnel. And then he comes up and there's a bunch of aliens with ring lights talking into their phones. So it did that just from a prompt. And I was like, and so what he's doing is he's taking Bible stories, throwing them into whatever ChatGPT. Boy, they really cornered the market on that. They are the Kleenex now. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. All AI is now ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And he goes, write this for children. And he takes the script and puts that script into something that's like automatic prompt something.com. I'll see if I can find the video. And it then writes a very descriptive prompt that you put into this video generator. And he went in and said, make it part Lego, part kind of game block kind of dude. And it's pretty interesting. And now he's putting those videos on YouTube. And hopefully he says monetizing. We'll see. Randy says, I provide it with a track list and transcript from my music show and have it write an episode summary and title. Usually comes out really good. Yep. It definitely has saved me some time. My favorite use of it is I will often record a webinar and have it transcribed in Otter and just go summarize the main points of this. Because the first 10 minutes, which drives me crazy, like, let's see where everybody's from. And it sounds like, Romper Room from 1967. Oh, I see Billy's from, New Zealand. Oh, okay. And Karen's from Poughkeepsie. Great. And, Bill's in Omaha. It's like, okay, can we get to the stuff I tuned in for? And then the last 10 minutes, Sharon has a question from Sandusky, and it's like, and then there's a big giant pitch at the end. I'm like, can we just give me the stuff I looked for? And Stephanie says, as always, it depends. Yeah, it always does.
I just asked ChatGPT. I said, I'm doing an Ask the Podcast Coach podcast with Dave Jackson right now. What should we talk about? And it said, nice. Since you're live with Dave Jackson on Ask the Podcast Coach, here's some fresh, engaging topics to discuss.
Nice.
That would spark conversation with your audience. Okay, I'll just do 3 of them.
Okay.
First one, is podcasting still growing or have we hit peak podcast? That's one. 2, the rise of AI tools in podcasting. It's funny, we just were talking about that. Right? Are they a threat or an opportunity? And then 3, your favorite, YouTube's increasing dominance in podcasting. Should podcasters shift their focus?
No. Again, if you want to be on YouTube, be on YouTube. Well, here's some news. The Apple has adopted a second Podcasting 2.0 script, which is kind of funny because I in and around podcasting with Mark Asquith and Danny Brown, came out with an episode that said, "Is Podcasting 2.0 dead?" James Cridlin and Sam Sethi said, "Hey, like, what's going on with Podcasting 2.0?" And I have definitely voiced my frustration with the whole Satoshi thing kind of blowing up. And we're all kind of like, maybe this will, and then Apple adopted a second. It's the whole thing about them with Apple now. You can still go to podcastconnect.apple.com and submit your show that way, but it's sounding like you're going to be able to submit them through your media hosts, and then you just have to claim your show. And the way you'll claim your show is possibly through apparently something to do with you'll put some sort of code in this text field that only you could do if you're the owner. So it's some sort of verification thing, and they're going to use this 2.0 field. And so everybody's like, "Oh, hey, wait a minute." Well, number one, kudos to Apple. And speaking of that, if you haven't filled out the Pod News, it's something card, report card, Google that, Pod News report, podcast report card. We need to fill that out soon. It takes, he says 10 minutes. It didn't take me 10 minutes, but he's just asking for feedback on the different apps and where you think podcasting is going. So that's something I want to point out. And it's just, so as much as, like, for me, I was really excited about the streaming Satoshi thing. And so when it kind of, like right now, it's harder than it needs to be. And so I was kind of like, all right, you know, but there's a whole lot going on. Like Adam just released Godcaster.fm, and all that is it takes a lot of these 2.0 features that media hosts aren't always embracing. And they have tools now that, because if you think about it, if they have control of your feed, control is maybe not the right word. If they can enhance your feed to have these different features, and they then have players, so you don't have to rely on other apps, players to take advantage of these features. Well, now you can create something that's completely different. And one of those things is, like, I need to look into the live action tag. And I asked Daniel once, like, how do you integrate a live stream in the show? Because obviously we're live on YouTube, but if we wanted to, we could go live in some of the Podcasting 2.0 apps. And I just remember Daniel explained it, and about halfway through I went, yeah, I'm not doing that. Because it was just, it sounded, although we could probably go live. I have a live streaming channel using a company called Radio Lize, Lize. Yes, live item tag. Thank you, Randy. And so 2.0 isn't dead. It's just a case where, and this is what Adam said. He goes, well, what are your expectations? And my expectations were the Podcast Standards Project was going to get together, sing Kumbaya, and figure out what the next feature everyone was going to implement. So I'm not really disappointed in Podcasting 2.0. Turns out I'm disappointed in the Podcast Standards Project, which went blah. And that was the thing, we really needed that for everything to work. So it's now working in a very disjointed fashion. And I know people have said that, you know, we need one person to be the champion of 2.0. I'm like, well, that was the Podcast Standards Project, and Sam stepped up for about a week and a half to be like the champion of the Podcast Standards Project, and went, oh, hey, hold on. Because it's, you know, if you think it's fun hurting podcasters, try hurting podcast companies who all have way different levels of tech debt and all sorts of other stuff. So I have rearranged my opinion on Podcasting 2.0 and realized that it's going to take a while for that to keep on. Steph says, yeah, we need a better marketing campaign. And she says, nobody outside of the School of Podcasting talks about it. Well, there are podcasts about podcasting, but it is one of those things that it's kind of like trying to market. Well, here's the thing, and somebody made a good point. What's in it for the listener? We talk a lot about what's in it for the podcaster. And it's one of those things where, like an iPod, we didn't know we needed our entire CD collection in our pocket until somebody gave it to us. But maybe this Godcaster thing where you can say, see, looky what you can do with this, might be something where people actually hop on board. Marcus Couch says, Kumbaya, sung by podcasters, is always out of key. Yeah, not much harmony there either. But SP says, bingo, what's in it for the listener? Yeah. And so if the listener could say, go into an app and say, show me podcasts in Georgia, because maybe you're looking for a local podcast, or show me podcasts. And this kind of works now. There's a people tag, show me and this is where we get into really niche, show me podcasts that are engineered by, John Domingo. Okay. Who's going to do that? Can we realistically say that? But we do have enhanced chapters. We have transcripts. Podping is the one I still don't understand if it's as easy as they say it is. And I love my friends at Libsyn, but come on, integrate Podping so that instead of it taking a half hour for your published episode to show up in apps or longer, Podping would get it up there in, 5-10 minutes, if that. And I always hear them say, you add one line of code to your, whatever your platform is. And, it's one of those things I'm like, is it really that easy? So we shall see. Let's see, the chat room, if you guys have questions, let's do that. Randy, I'm going to nominate you, just because you're Randy Black and you're fun and you're a nerd. And I'm sorry, that's offensive. If you ever call Randy Black a nerd, he will correct you. He's a geek.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Randy, can you go to askthepodcastcoach.com/question? I want to make sure this isn't broken. And I know the only reason I pick Randy is he's done it before. And not that
I went out to it and I got in.
You got in? Okay.
Yeah,
That's true if you think about it, because you wouldn't be here if it didn't work, because that's how you get in every week.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's fun.
That's always fun. So let's go back to then a question. This is always a fun one. We haven't interviewed this. I haven't done. It's a classic. I need a jingle for that, like classic questions on Ask the Podcast Coach. And there he is. I hear him there. So it's working. That's the good news. But I can now do this screen and saying coming to the stage is, and if I remember it, if I go to this one, and then what I have to do, if I can get my eCam to come back up, is if I assign Randy to guest 2, in theory, there he is. Randy's like, man, it's Saturday morning. You're going to make me get on camera. But I do love the fact that your microphone now matches your background. How cool is that? It's fun. Excellent. Well, thank you for testing that. Shout out your website. Except he can't hear us.
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think I figured out the problem the last time I tried to come on.
Yeah.
I've got it set to use the USB chat on the Rodecaster.
Yeah.
But I have the USB chat on my list of sources. I think I found the problem.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
That's maybe what solved it. So if anything you want to find out about me, randallblack.com. You can also check out my shows, Bible-Bites with a Y, BYTES.com. And my music show is m2h2music.com. That's the Mountain Music Happy Hour. I'm getting ready to do episodes of both of them when this ends. So there should be episodes of both of those out later today.
There you go. Excellent.
Randy, did you paint that? Did you custom paint your microphone?
No.
It's
yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Rode makes several different colored options for the pod mic for the windscreen. If you buy the USB version that Dave has, and I've got one too, it comes with a black one, but you can buy one that's blue, red, pink, purple, orange, green. There's a whole bunch of them. I've got a second mic just on the other side of a monitor here because I've got, like Dave said, I'm a geek. I've got 3 monitors set up. 2 of them are turned to portrait. One's landscape, so I can control everything. But I got another mic over here. It's got a blue cover on it, and the cables are color coded, so I know what's what. My son has 2 different pod mics, one here at my house, one at his mother's. He's got the windscreens on them. They work great, better than the big foam ball ones I had purchased previously. So but Rode has good stuff. I'm all in with Rode on everything.
And never underestimate the power of a portrait monitor. Like that is
especially when you're editing an RSS feed.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's
holy
it.
cow.
Everyone should have at least one monitor in portrait mode on their desktop. That's what I think. So good on you for having that done.
2, one on each side. Everything's 27 inch. Everything's 4K. So
yeah.
My Mac Mini loves pushing out graphics.
Yeah, nicely done. Nicely
Excellent.
done. Randy, thanks for jumping in and making sure our feed's working. Appreciate it.
Yep. No problem, guys. Thanks.
Yep.
You bet.
SP said, I tried to go to the site and could not tell which microphone was which one. I had about 7 microphone inputs. Well, that's convenient.
Oh.
Yeah. And then you just keep picking them and picking them and picking them and picking them. So that's always kind of fun. Interesting. Yeah, because it's we get all giddy when people actually come in live. That's always, I mean, we appreciate your chats. We realize those are easier. We realize it's Saturday depending on what coast you're on. If you're on the West Coast, it's even earlier. It's like 7 a.m. I'm like, I'm not getting on camera. So that's always kind of fun to do. And with that, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to end 4 minutes early because I'm looking at questions. And I'm like, we can't really answer those.
Hold on. Let me come back. Stephanie just asked a question about.
Oh, good. There you go.
Mode. So there is. Excuse me. Hold on. Sorry, still overcoming the cold. There is some content, and actually writing is a little bit better when you think about the way Word is laid out. Unfortunately, we still, when we write, we still think of writing on a piece of paper.
Yep.
Like there is literally nothing anymore that dictates that we need to have an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper when we're writing something, right? And yet you go to Word, you open it up. What does it open up in? 8.5 by 11 or A4 for our friends in Europe.
Right.
So, but we that's just the way our brains have been designed. I think eventually, Dave, that'll stop happening. But for now, writing that way, because we still write in that form, portrait mode is a very convenient mode to have that in. If you have a list of things like a chat actually in portrait mode, if you want to see more of the chat, you can get more content down the line of chat. My Unraid server, I have an Unraid server, and its dashboard looks better in portrait mode. And so just, again, going down long sometimes fits the content better than widescreen does for whatever reason. So there's just some dashboard things. There's some sites that look better. There's some content. If you've got a bunch of RSS feeds, if you're dealing with anything, lists of anything, but portrait is a great way to do it. Not hard to do. So now, not all screens will do it. Some are screwed on the back, and you can't change them this way. Right. For a while, they were making screens you could pull them up and twist them this way, and then you just tell your computer, "Hey, see this thing in portrait mode." And it works out really, really well. I keep one on the desk in portrait mode. It's just really handy to have it there, and works out really well. It's very, very common for folks to take a ultra wide, a tall not tall, but pretty tall ultra wide. Then you could take a 24-inch monitor and move it to the side, and they match up. So you'd have widescreen and then portrait next to it. I've seen folks do 2 portraits side to side from their widescreens, which is I think kind of cool. There's lots of things you can do that way with space and resolution. So if you have never thought about doing a monitor in portrait, boy, you're missing out. Try it sometime and move some of your content there. It's a completely different way of looking at things. Samsung has an ARC monitor that's designed specifically. It's a widescreen. I think it's 55 inches wide, but the stand is specifically made to go into portrait. And it comes up it's curved, so it comes up and curves up on your desk. and you can get 3 1080p size screens in one monitor. I've always dreamed of having 3 of those and having 9 screens of it.
Looking like a Vegas bookie room, man. It's like
my best day ever. It would be a whole wall of screens, still not enough for me. So anyways, that's why Stephanie Portrait is you should try it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Marcus Couch, my old buddy, getting a monitor arm that can swivel is helpful.
Yep. For sure.
Chris Nessie, I have one of my 3 monitors inverted. I feel like I'm missing out. I only have 2 monitors. I have monitor envy now.
I have 11. Let's just be clear on my desk. I have 11 right now.
Right now?
Right. Hold on. Let me recount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9.
You're kidding me.
Actually, 12. 12 things I can see. Yes. Yes.
But like, how do you is there some sort of like hardware that you plug one in?
For sure. Yeah. I've docking stations and things to make it work. 4 dedicated to work. Then I have 3 PCs down here running. I have a Mac. I've got a Windows Beast. I've got a Surface that runs some of my dashboarding stuff. I've got a laptop that runs. This is kind of the crypto space up here. So they're definitely divided into areas. And then the front monitor is all about podcasting. So this one here is all my podcast stuff. So yeah, it's ridiculous.
That deserves this. It really does.
And now, he's been waiting for this. It's time for Jim to get his nerd on.
12 monitors.
Yeah, 12 things to look at on my desk. Yeah, I have a problem. You have URL problems. I have monitor problems. Let's just be clear. I like to see everything.
That is crazy. I've never heard of that.
I have 2 over my shoulder. I'm not even counting right.
So it's really 14?
In the space, I can see 14 different things. Sorry.
All right. I did not know that. That's amazing. And I have 2. I feel like I'm in the 1930s, back when we had 2 monitors. Jim, what is coming up on the AverageGuy.tv?
So Mike Uyghur joins me, longtime co-host. We spent a little time catching up with him. Talk a little bit about some technology that goes into ice fishing. It's been super cold here in Nebraska, and so he's been taking his kids out ice fishing. The sonar stuff that we have now is incredible. So you can check it out today. HomeGadgetGeeks.com.
Nice. Yeah, we're supposed to get up to 33 today, and I'm like, we've literally been below freezing for like 2 weeks. It's I'm tired of it. But on the School of Podcasting, here's the fun thing. I don't know. It's either going to be newsletters. I've got about 3 things I've been researching, and I will look at that today when I get done editing Ask the Podcast Coach. I will pick one, and you can go to schoolofpodcasting.com/follow. Follow the show, and then you'll get it the minute it comes out. I think it's going to be newsletters right now, but I need to double check on some other things. And we want to thank Mark from podcastbranding.co and Dan from basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Want to thank the chat room. Thanks to Metal Mayhem. And I want to say his name is John. I'm like 90% sure it's John. I've worked with John in the past, but I'm like, I don't want to say John because if I'm wrong, I'm going to look.
Well, you did. Guess what? You just did.
I'm going to look really stupid if I got it wrong. Yeah.
That's right.
But I'm pretty sure that's it. But that's it. So thanks to everybody for coming out. We will be here next week with another episode of Ask the Podcast Coach.